Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We're brought to you today by the Jordan Harbinger Show. Good, bad, crazy martinis for conservatives. If you are a Republican in Georgia, Jim, how do we put this? Go vote if you haven't already. You have till 7 p.m. Eastern time to get out there and do that. I'd say these elections matter just a smidge, wouldn't you, Jim?
Understatement of the year. Yes, it's only a couple of days into January, but no, look, I mean, my guess is hopefully by the time you've heard this, you've already voted because you don't want to leave any time. But if not, if you have not voted and you're in Georgia and you want to vote, I don't even care who you want to vote for, although clearly you know which one I'm rooting for or which ones I'm rooting for. You know, go out and do it. You don't want to, if you're online, they'll let you keep voting, but you don't want to deal with those hassles and headaches. Get out there, get it done. You've done your duty as a citizen.
Excellent. And we'll maybe have results tomorrow, but as we learned in November, sometimes you don't get Georgia results on the very next day, but there's no 50% threshold this time, although I guess there has to be because there's only two candidates in these races. Can Republicans win just one and keep the majority? Can they hold on to both, or will the Democrats end up with the majority in the U.S. Senate? We will find out. But let's start with our good martini today, Jim. And, you know, there's lots of numbers you can look at to determine how the economy is looking overall, which policies might be working. But one of the most interesting ones is what people do with their feet. In other words, where are they moving out of and where are they moving to? And when you look at the locations that people are leaving and that they're headed to as of 2020, this is courtesy of United Van Lines, folks they've worked with and who they've moved. So let's start with the bad news because you want to end with the good news. But see if you can spot a trend here, Jim. What they do here is the highest percentage of moves out. So 81% of the people they dealt with in Nassau County, New York, which is Long Island, 81% leaving, which doesn't leave a lot for people who are coming in. Number two, Bergen, New Jersey, also 81%. Then Trenton, New Jersey. New York City itself is number 4. Newark, New Jersey, 5. Chicago, Illinois, 6. Bremerton, Washington, 7. Bridgeport, Connecticut, 8. Middlesex, New Jersey, 9. And Lake, Illinois, 10, down at 68%. As far as where people are headed, Wilmington, North Carolina, number 1, 79% of those they dealt with moving in. Sarasota, Florida, number 2 at 78%. Then Boise, Idaho, Huntsville, Alabama, Fort Myers, Florida, Knoxville, Tennessee, Melbourne, Florida, Austin, Texas, Nashville, Tennessee, and Fort Collins, Colorado. So, Jim, you can tell that the tri-state area and the political dumpster fire that is Illinois are seeing a lot of exit. We've also seen numbers not from United Van Lines, but just in general that California had its biggest exodus, I think, ever. And then some of these redder states, many of them with Republican governors and more freedom and warmer, I might add, are places where people are headed. So, it's not exactly a PhD crunching of the numbers, but it's very interesting. And I think it tells you a lot about the kind of government people want to live in.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised to see Middlesex, New Jersey on that list of people of where the exodus is occurring. That's where I grew up, in a small town called Metuchen. I noticed obviously most of those are urban areas. Most of those are deep blue parts of the country. And the other thing that jumps out is generally they are fairly densely populated areas. Have to go back and check the precise figures for each community on the what's the opposite of an exodus, Greg? An insidious? You know?
Ask Emmanuel Cleaver, man. He's got all the polar opposites.
A woman, yes, yeah. Where they're womanly going. No, so, generally, people are moving to the south, moving to redder parts of the country, and moving to less dense parts of the country. My suspicion is that if you're going to be locked down, apartment living does not look very appealing. New York City has 1,000,001 wonderful things to do, but if Broadway is shut down and all the things you traditionally enjoy that involve crowds and getting on the subway feels like a hazardous thing to do, all of a sudden living in a big city doesn't feel as appealing as it might have in previous years. There is a dark lining to this silver cloud, if you like this. It's the Californication, as they say. Parts of the country like Texas and Colorado and other parts of the country say, well, we used to be red states. And then all these people from California moved here because they were frustrated with what California was becoming. And then they started electing the exact same candidates who they think ruined the state of California in the first place. So be careful, other parts of the country, with seeing all these people moving here. But the other thing I think is worth kind of observing about all this. Look, there are certain parts of the country that start off just our lifetimes with certain built-in advantages. Large chunks of California have wonderful weather all year long. That's always going to be appealing for people when they think about where they want to live. If you are a farmer, the Central Valley of California, it's got really good soil. It's a really great place. Some of the most biggest and most productive farms in the country are there. You can't just move easily because that's where your life is and your livelihood is. If you want to work in finance, you're going to go to New York City in all likelihood. That is kind of the center of that. You want to work in entertainment, Los Angeles is going to be the center of that, although I guess you could say that lately it seems like all kinds of movie and TV production is moving to Vancouver. You add all that up, and there is this, certain places have these advantages, and maybe the New Yorks and the Californias of the world never really thought they were going to have that kind of serious competition. That if you wanted to live in finance, you'd have to be relatively close to New York City, which gave you the options of New York, New Jersey, or California. If you wanted to be in the tech world, you had to be in Silicon Valley, and thus you had to pay ludicrous amounts of rent to live in a closet, basically, in Silicon Valley. People, particularly with the idea of the rise of remote working, are saying, I don't know if I necessarily need to do this. And the hassles are not necessarily worth it. So does political environment, the tax environment, the business environment, that's not the only factor that goes to people's decisions when they think about moving, but I think they're all big and contributing factors. And I think it's another indicator that the blue state model is really, if it's not sustainable, it is not easily sustainable. And these jurisdictions are in states and localities are probably going to have more problems in the future, certainly unless they get rid of, the likes of Bill de Blasio and politicians who think like that.
Fascinating to look at the map here, Jim, because California is one where folks are leaving in what they call high outbound moves. North Dakota and Kansas and Louisiana, and then everything else that's outbound is east of the Mississippi River. There's this swath from Illinois, which is pretty deep here, all the way across Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and then heavy again in New York and up in New England, even into New Hampshire. And interestingly, even our own state where we live here in Virginia, which I think had been growing quite a bit. Certainly Northern Virginia had been, but that's also on the outbound list. And so you're right. There are a lot of factors here, partly due to COVID, partly due to environment in terms of policy. I mean, California's got, a 13% state income tax rate in addition to everything else and high cost of living. And so that's forcing a lot of people to move to Texas and elsewhere, which again is why Texas is getting more competitive politically. And so again, state policies aren't the only issue, although we'll talk in our Bad Martini about why if you have a really, really horrible governor, it might be one of the contributing factors to why you'd want to leave. But I don't think it's completely coincidental that it's the stranglehold governments that are seeing the exodus in many cases and the more free-loving states that people want to go to.
Stranglehold states is a good term, Greg.
Yes, exactly. Well, we'll get to the governor I mentioned in just a moment, but let's talk about our sponsor today, Jordan Harbinger. It's a podcast a lot of people are really listening to, and I know that every day somebody tells you you've just got to listen to some podcast, and you say, sure, and you never do it. We certainly don't want you to do that with the 3 Martini Lunch. And I think you can find a lot of interest on the Jordan Harbinger show as well. Apple named it one of its best of 2018. It's aimed at making you a better informed, more critical thinker so you can get a sense of how the world actually works and come to your own conclusions about what's happening, even inside your own head.
Each episode is a conversation with a different fascinating guest. And when I say there's something for everyone here, I really mean that. In one episode, Jordan talks to a hostage negotiator from the FBI who offers techniques on how to get people to like and trust you, which sounds useful and disturbing at the same time. Another episode tells the story of a cinematographer who discovered a lost city in the jungle and made one of the most important archaeological finds of the century.
Isn't that the premise of King Kong? That they went there to shoot a movie?
I was going to say Indiana Jones or something. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's other fascinating topics as well. And they get some big name guests from time to time. Mark Cuban, owner of the Dallas Mavericks. And my wife and I are pretty much addicted to Shark Tank. And so he's on there as well. He did a whole episode on Tales from the Shark Side. Also, Gary Kasparov, the chess grandmaster, Deep Thinking for Disordered Times. And just to tell you the variety on this program, they've even got one called My Roommate Tried to Kill Me. I hope the takeaway there is move. And I guess you want to move to somewhere that's not in the tri-state area based on what we talked about in the Good Martini here. So Jordan's always focused on pulling useful, practical insights out of his guests. He's not talking about pop psychology or wishy-washy self-help. The episodes are loaded with bits of wisdom you can use to legitimately change your mind and improve your life. And so you want to go to the Jordan Harbinger Show. That's Harb as in boy, IN as in Nancy, GER on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Jim, I think most people probably could have figured out that the horrible governor is Andrew Cuomo, but there's a new reason why he's horrible, and it has to do with vaccines. This is from Reason. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has given hospitals a conundrum. Fail to use all of your COVID-19 vaccines within 7 days of receipt? That'll be a $100,000 fine. But vaccinate someone out of the state designated order? That'll be a $1 million fine. Almost picture Dr. Evil with the pinky up to the corner of his mouth there. So you can't let your vaccines expire, and you really can't vaccinate someone if they're not exactly next in order. The state's distribution plan mandates that a slew of people receive the vaccine before the elderly, including healthcare workers, patient-facing employees at long-term care facilities, first responders, teachers, public health workers, grocery store workers, pharmacists, transit employees. All these people get it before the elderly. And so the distribution plan is not going well. Cuomo's basically flailing out, promising to punish anyone severely who doesn't either get rid of all their vaccines and to the right people. DC officials, to their credit, recently said, if you've unthawed these, that's not a word, if you've thawed the vaccines and they're going to expire soon, give them to whoever wants one. That's the way to go about it. But Andrew Cuomo, who has to be in charge, Jim, and has to micromanage everything, is falling flat on his face here.
Yeah, I think somebody on Twitter had said this summarizes the Andrew Cuomo mentality in a nutshell. Everything is either forbidden or mandatory. There's no in between. There's no flexibility. There's no ability for hospitals and localities to adapt to the situation in their communities as they see it. He is absolutely convinced that he, from his desk of the governorship, knows the right position for everyone. And if you don't do as he says, he will punish you with relish. This, by the way, is why politicians really should not get much good coverage. Every once in a while, I suppose they might deserve it. But when you give a politician good coverage, you are enabling narcissists and you are enabling people who are probably a little bit different in the head. Otherwise, they wouldn't have run for that office in the first place. This is what we've come to expect from Andrew Cuomo. I don't think this is going to work very well. There are states that I like that have had real problems with this. I was disappointed to learn that Florida is, I believe, 6th from the bottom. They're ahead of Virginia. Great job there, Ralph Northam. It isn't necessarily a couple weeks ago. West Virginia was doing the best job out of all the 50 states. The state that was doing the absolute worst at that point was Maryland, Larry Hogan. I generally like him, but that was a really disappointing start. Maryland has creeped up a bit in the last couple of days. By the way, this is all by the measurement of what percentage of their initial allotment of vaccines have they actually gotten into people's arms. Right now, the state that is dead last is Kansas. Now, maybe you're a fan of the Democratic governor out there, Laura Kelly, or maybe you're not. But I kind of noticed you're not seeing CNN do big specials on, big primetime segments on how Governor Kelly's messing this up. No, that's not all. It's just not that interesting that the state is ranking 50th out of 50th. Oh, by the way, the governor says that the CDC figures are wrong and that their own figures indicate they're doing a better job than all the other states. But no, she won't share those figures with you right now. We are truly cursed with an utterly abominable group of leaders. Oh, by the way, while we're whacking around New York politicians, Greg, we should point out that I believe it was the New York City Council was very frustrated at how the state was doing, how the city was doing a very slow job of initially rolling out the vaccines. And they have decided that they are going to review this. They're going to hold an oversight hearing. They're going to get to the bottom of this a week from now. We're going to get to this next Tuesday. How's that sound? Yeah, there you go. Time is of the essence. I assure you, no one will rest until we get to that. Let's grab some lunch.
Can't wait. Let's form a committee. That's the way things always get done. Amazing, but unsurprising, given Andrew Cuomo's track record. Yet, as you said, he probably still won't take much heat for this from the national press. So with Laura Kelly, does that mean that Democrats want recounts now? Is that what we're hearing with vaccination numbers? all getting very confusing.
Hey guys, it's Mock and Daisy from Chicks on the Right. We're excited to tell you about our podcast, the Mock and Daisy Common Sense Cast.
From discussing topics like cancel culture, what's happening to our new generations, crises in our nation, and even some high-profile interviews, each week we touch on subjects that matter to us and matter to you.
And we're not afraid to tell you how it is. So tune in every week to hear us talk about the things or even just get a good laugh.
To find out more, go to our website, chicksontheright.com, or start listening on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
Don't forget to leave a comment or review and subscribe.
All right, let's move on to our crazy martini now. Jim, and Kamala Harris, I don't know if she's the next generation Hillary Clinton or what she is here, but it's pretty rare that we see a woman make up stuff that doesn't really help her for no good reason as much as Kamala Harris. We first of all saw her, and this may have been true, that she was a part of the busing program when she was basically accusing Joe Biden of being a racist back in the summer of 2019. Then she talked about how she was smoking weed and listening to Tupac back in the mid-'80s, and Tupac and Snoop Dogg didn't have albums out at that time. And then she, just a couple weeks ago, I guess, maybe a little over a week ago, was talking about how Kwanzaa was such an important part of her life when she was a little girl, even though Kwanzaa was basically invented right around that time. So a lot of people are casting doubt on how true that actually is. And now there's actually a story from Kamala Harris going around that when she was a baby in Oakland, California, she was part of a civil rights demonstration, and she fell out of a stroller. And when her parents turned around to pick her up, she was so inconsolable, they finally asked her, what can we get you? What do you need? And she just said, Fweedom. And as it turns out, as unbelievable as that story would already be for a 1-year-old, apparently she lifted it straight from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who told the story about a little girl in Birmingham back in 1965, and who basically said that what she wanted was freedom, or feedom, or however she said it as a very little girl at that time. And so, Jim, I guess the only thing we're missing from this story is that Kamala Harris didn't say she was that little girl in Birmingham, but this is a woman who makes a lot of unforced errors, and she's going to be working for a president who already makes a lot of unforced errors. So I don't know. Is this going to be the New York Jets of administrations?
Greg, look, it's a busy news environment, and it's very easy to imagine a scenario in which this little anecdote gets lost. That basically, there's big things going on with Capitol Hill and the Electoral College, big things going on in the pandemic. But in the end, like we've the phone call between Trump and Georgia's Secretary of State, but something like this really shouldn't escape our attention entirely. It's possible that Kamala Harris heard this story from an older relative. Maybe the older relative is misremembering it. Maybe this is one of those memories you wish was true. They would be perfect and cute and Fweedom and all that stuff. I don't know about you, Greg. I just think of The Princess Bride and marriage. Marriage is what brings us here together today. Insert Bugs Bunny joke here. Look, in the is this going to derail the career of Kamala Harris? No, but it's just kind of look. Kamala Harris is light years away from being my favorite politician. Might be one with the very worst, but you look at the story of her immigrant parents meeting and having her as a child, and she grows up to become the next vice president of the United States. Look, we can at least feel good about that. Like the story of Kamala Harris's family is nice enough. There's no need to gild the lily. There's no need to, give it that extra little rhetorical flourish to make it perfectly cinematic and all that kind of stuff. It's the same way that that little girl was me, and then it turned out, well, actually, no, the law that Biden was pushing for wasn't necessarily going to end. Wasn't going to resegregate schools where she was and such. The truth is never quite enough for her. She always tried to go that extra step, that extra mile. And in this case, she managed to pick an anecdote that lots of people recognized and said, wait a minute, that sounds kind of familiar. So she should pay a price for it. She really won't. But it's just this is a pattern to keep an eye on as she steps into the vice presidency, to kind of keep an eye on the fact of how many times is it, memory as it actually happened, or is it the memory that, she wishes she had? And it would make it a little more better for the, the Hollywood docudrama that will inevitably be made of, the little girl who was me, the Kamala Harris story, coming to Lifetime sometime next year.
They just can't help themselves. It's like Hillary saying she was named after Sir Edmund Hillary, even though she was born several years before he climbed Mount Everest. I mean, it's
the Tuzla Dash.
That's right. I mean, who knows what goes on in these minds? Do they actually convince themselves it really happened, or do they just get so deluded into their own promotion that they think they have to do it in order to gain more ground? But I mean,
I suspect it's a variation of each time you tell the story, the fish got a little bit bigger. You know, you ever got into a fight? Each time you tell the story, the guy gets a little bigger. You know? Each time she becomes a little more perfect. The details become a little better about how she was born to become president of the United States someday, blah, blah, blah.
2 bits of advice for Kamala Harris. I stress the first one more than the second. And your boss could tell you this, Kamala. A, don't plagiarize. It's bad for you. B, if you're going to plagiarize, try to pick someone a little more obscure than Dr. King, because chances are somebody's going to know that story already. Just a hint. Jim, it's only January 5th. See you tomorrow.
Is it March yet? Anyway.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos, Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Don't forget about the Jordan Harbinger Show. Also, please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast. We're very grateful for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Also, you can get us on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Have a great day and join us Wednesday, possibly with election results, on the next 3 Martini Lunch.